There are many different kinds of emergency situations that can potentially happen on board a vessel. A good crew must be properly trained to know how to handle every kind of emergency in order to minimize the amount of damage and loss of life that can occur in these kinds of situations. What you learn in safety training courses will largely influence how you respond to these emergencies. Actively participating in emergency drills aboard your vessels will also play a role in how you respond. Problems could occur for several different reasons from a number of different sources. Emergencies could occur in the following areas: the engine room, the galley or food preparation area. Electrical fire or explosion can occur behind electrical panels, misuse of electrical equipment by crew members, vehicles on deck, cars or camping trailers, wherever flammable liquid and gas are stored, in paint lockers, accumulations of paint, thinner-soaked rags, guest cabins on ships with accommodation, carelessly discarded cigarette ash, and live cigarette butts, supply storage or hazardous materials stored in tanks, collision and structural failure. Any emergency on board a vessel requires immediate attention and the knowledge of proper emergency and safety protocols. The appropriate response will be slightly different depending on what kind of emergency the vessel is dealing with, but there are some general steps that should always be followed. Step 1. Assess the situation. The most important thing to determine is whether or not the vessel is taking on water as a result of the situation. You must also deduce whether or not there are any casualties and what the extent of their injuries are. And finally, see if you were able to determine what happened that caused the situation in the first place. Step 2. Report the situation to the bridge. You must immediately report everything you just assessed to the bridge, particularly the number of casualties. The captain has full command of the vessel and must be fully aware of what is going on in order to take appropriate action to prevent as much damage or loss of life as possible. If something happens down below, there is no way for the captain and officers on the bridge to know exactly what has occurred. Fully reporting the situation is one of the most important steps in any emergency response. Step 3. Apply first aid. After the captain has been apprised, you can then tend to the casualties as best as you are able to and supply first aid if necessary. The most common types of emergencies on board a vessel may include fire, collision, explosion, stranding, equipment failure, capsizing, weather conditions, flooding, man overboard, and medical emergencies. There are some similarities to how these situations are approached, but also some differences. So we will go through them one by one to outline the appropriate response and potential consequences. If you discover a fire, you must immediately pull the alarm and contact the bridge to let them know what is going on. You need to let them know what type of fire you are dealing with and if there are any casualties. You must then move any casualties to a safe location away from the fire and close down any ventilation. Then locate the nearest fire extinguisher or hose and advise all passengers to go to their muster station. If you don't know where your muster station is, ask your chief mate, and he will show you where they are and what's expected of you in the case of an emergency. Do not, however, go into any closed space by yourself. It is important to have somebody nearby at all times in case you get into trouble yourself. Fire emergencies must be dealt quickly in order to minimize their damage and effects. If left unchecked, fires can result in serious damage to the vessel, loss of stability, which in turn can cause capsizing and pollution, and loss of life. Regardless of who is at fault, a collision with another vessel may cause serious damage to either or both vessels and requires an immediate emergency response. As with any emergency situation, you must first assess the situation and determine first and foremost if you are taking on water. This is the most important thing to assess, as your vessel could be sinking if you are taking on too much water. You must then also determine if there are any casualties before reporting your findings to the captain on the bridge. Afterwards, you may proceed with applying first aid as necessary to any casualties. A collision may result in serious damage to one or both vessels, which, just like a fire emergency, can result in loss of stability, capsizing, and pollution. It can also cause other emergencies to break out on the vessel, such as a fire or explosion. As with most other emergency situations, loss of life is always a concern. An explosion on board a vessel will normally take you by surprise and has a high chance of resulting in some casualties. As with a fire emergency, you will want to immediately pull the alarm before assessing the situation and reporting your findings to the captain on the bridge. After the captain has been informed, you can begin administering first aid to any casualties in need. An explosion will undoubtedly do some serious damage to the vessel, which in turn may cause a loss of stability, capsizing, and pollution. As with any emergency that threatens the structural integrity of the vessel, loss of life is always a concern in any explosion situation. Stranding occurs when a ship accidentally runs aground. This might happen for a variety of reasons, but in all cases, the proper emergency response protocol must be followed. You must assess the situation and try to determine if the vessel is taking on any water and/or what might have caused it to run aground in the first place. When a vessel runs aground, it comes to a sudden stop, which can throw people off their balance and cause a number of casualties. Make note of these casualties as part of your assessment, and as always, report your findings to the bridge immediately. Afterwards, you can begin administering first aid. In the case of stranding, the damage is going to be to the bottom of the vessel and can be quite severe. This creates a big risk of stability loss and/or capsizing, which in turn can create pollution and/or result in loss of life. There are a lot of different kinds of equipment on board a vessel, and sometimes things can go wrong and/or malfunction. Equipment failure emergencies carry the same kinds of risks as other situations and must be handled in a similar manner. Specifically, if you see something wrong happen with a piece of equipment, you must assess the situation and report your findings to the bridge before applying first aid if necessary. Equipment failures can cause injuries and risk damaging the vessel, which in turn may result in more serious consequences, such as stranding or sinking. And as with all emergency situations, loss of life is always a risk. Capsizing is one of the most serious and life-threatening emergencies that can happen on board a vessel. It often occurs as the culmination of another incident, such as an explosion or stranding. Passengers will most likely be panicking in such a situation, so you must do your best to try and calm them and assure them that the situation is under control. You need to also make sure everyone has a life jacket on and is prepared to go into the water. If they do not have a jacket, you must give them one immediately. Meaning, you must know where the life jackets are stored on the vessel well before an emergency situation occurs. There are 2 different sizes of jackets for adults and children, so you must make sure that children are given the right size and help is provided to make sure they have put them on properly. After making sure all passengers have their life jackets on, you must then contact the bridge with a casualty report. If you are unable to call due to the water or instability of the vessel, someone must go on foot to report the situation to the bridge. After this is done, you must prepare to help with launching the life rafts. A capsized vessel can wind up sinking, resulting in the loss of the entire vessel. There is also a risk of injuries and loss of life for both the passengers and crew. A vessel may sink extremely fast once it is capsized, so a well-trained crew implementing proper safety protocols is of the utmost importance in order to minimize the loss of life in such an emergency. Weather conditions are always regularly checked by the prudent mariner. Extreme weather conditions are not only uncomfortable but also may cause damage to the vessel. If you find yourself in an extreme weather situation where the safety of your passengers might be compromised, you must act immediately to assess the situation and distribute life jackets to every passenger. You must also try to calm the passengers and let them know that the situation is under control, initiating crowd control procedures if necessary. And as always, contact the bridge to apprise them of the situation, including a casualty report if applicable. Extreme weather conditions might result in injuries or seasickness for the passengers and crew, as well as damage to the vessel itself. Vessels have been lost in heavy weather, and with any such emergency, loss of life is always a concern. Flooding occurs when water enters a compartment through an opening in the bottom or enters from above or by any means while the bottom remains intact. If you discover flooding on your vessel, you must assess the situation and immediately inform the bridge of what you have seen. Then close the watertight doors and distribute life jackets to all the passengers. As with a capsizing or extreme weather incident, the passengers may be frightened or panicked, so you must attempt to calm them or initiate crowd control procedures if necessary. The intake of water can result in injuries and cargo or personal property damage. If the flooding is severe, it can damage or even sink the vessel, resulting in potential loss of life or ship. Man overboard is always a mayday situation. If you spot someone going overboard, you must immediately raise the alarm and assign someone as the spotter. Inform the bridge of the situation at once, and then work to calm the passengers and initiate crowd control procedures as the rescue effort unfolds. Depending on sea state, visibility, water temperature, the person in the water, and the capabilities of the crew, injuries, hypothermia, or loss of life may result. It is possible that a passenger or crew member might have a medical emergency while on board the vessel. If you see something like this happen, you should assess the situation immediately and check the casualties' ABCs, airway, breathing, and circulation. You should then contact the bridge and apprise them of the situation. After the bridge has been informed, you may begin administering first aid or use an AED if necessary. The other passengers might be frightened after seeing something like this happen, so calming and crowd control procedures might be necessary while the casualty is being attended to. Depending on the nature of the emergency, the casualty might need to be evacuated back to shore, and depending on the reaction of the crew and emergency responders, loss of life may occur. Once you have assessed the situation and alerted the bridge, it is up to the vessel's master to decide how to proceed. There are several signals and alarms that he or she can sound which will alert you as to what your next course of action should be. One type of alarm you might hear is one long continuous sounding of the ship's horn. This signal is used to indicate fire on board. A second common signal you might hear is 3 long blasts, repeated. This is the standard signal for man overboard. Sometimes things might escalate to a point where abandoning ship is the only option. This order can only be issued by the captain. The standard signal for the abandonment of a ship is 7 short blasts on the horn, followed by 1 long blast, followed by the continuous ringing of a bell. Vessels are required by the boat and fire drill regulations to carry out boat and fire drills, give basic safety training as well as specific training for that vessel. The most important tool is the emergency procedures arsenal in an emergency muster list. Muster lists are posted at conspicuous locations including navigation bridge and engine room. A muster list must contain the following information: details of the general emergency alarm signal, the fire signal, and the public address system. Details of how the order to abandon ship is given. An indication of the station to which each crew member is to report when the general emergency alarm signal or the fire alarm signal is sounded, including the closing of watertight doors, fire doors, valves, scuppers, skylights, portholes, and other similar openings in the ship. The equipping of the survival craft and the other life-saving equipment. Ensuring that the radio life-saving equipment is placed aboard the appropriate survival craft. The preparation and launching of the survival craft. The general preparation of the other life-saving equipment. The list of passengers. The operation of the communications equipment. The duties of the fire parties. Any special duties assigned in respect to the use of the fire equipment and installations. The master of any vessel shall familiarize and instruct the crew with respect to the arrangement and facilities of the vessel and the duties of the crew in respect to boat and fire drills. The master is also responsible to train crew members in their duties regarding the safety of passengers. The master shall enter in the official logbook full particulars of each boat and fire drill. If an official log is not carried, then it must be entered in the agreement with the crew, or if no agreement, a permanent record shall be kept of these drills. The boat and fire drill requirement cannot take into account the variety and different arrangement of all vessels. Thus, it is the responsibility of the master to train, drill, and instruct all crew members in any duty they may be called on to perform. Fire drills are to be conducted every 2 weeks and should include training and testing of the following. Drilled in their duties as required by their leader. Hoses run out and examined. Each hose shall be tested under pressure at least once every 2 months. Nozzles and other spray equipment tested and crew instructed in its use. All fire extinguishers checked, and at each drill, 1 or more discharged for purpose of crew training. Self-contained breathing apparatus examined and crew members instructed in duties in the engine room spaces. All fire doors, ventilation shaft dampers, watertight doors, remote fuel shutoffs shall be examined and the crew instructed in their operation. All equipment used in a drill shall be examined, renewed, or repaired as required and returned to its proper location. Shall include training in the action and the testing of equipment. Preparation for the launching of lifeboats or other life-saving appliances, ensuring that the equipment required to be carried is in place and properly stowed. Drilling the crew in their duties and where inflatable life rafts are carried, the special instructions for their use. Launching of lifeboats so that all boat carried shall be lowered in the water at intervals of not more than 3 months. Clearing away and swinging out 1 or more boats so that all boats carried are swung out at intervals of not more than 1 month. At each drill, examine and test any motor-driven or mechanically propelled systems. Examine and test any emergency electrical power system. Life jackets, life buoys, line-throwing appliances, and all distressed signals shall be examined and any deficiency in their condition or storage corrected. No matter what emergency your vessel might be dealing with, remember to always contact the bridge to advise them of any situation and/or to receive further instructions in an emergency situation. Know the different emergency signals and what you are supposed to do in any particular situation. Make sure you know the location of your muster station, and also make sure you have your first aid certificate so that you can assist with the emergency response efforts. An emergency can happen on board any vessel. A swift and appropriate emergency response by a well-trained crew is the single most effective way to reduce the damage and potential loss of life that might accompany any incident.